It's 6 p.m. in New York City. It's time for the Daily Wrap. And welcome to the show, everybody. Coming up, ISIS abducts close to 90 Christians in Syria. Veterans Affairs Secretary Robert McDonnell is caught lying about his military service, and Reverend Al Sharpton is accused of being a money grubber, who thought, by the daughter of NYPD choking victim Eric Gardner. We'll love to hear about that one. But first, we're going to discuss all that and much more with Philly hotshot attorney Heather Hansen is here. Welcome, Heather.
Great to be here.
Forbes magazine Pulitzer progressive columnist and Sirius XM radio host Rick Unger, everybody. And finally, new to the Daily Wrap, author and columnist and apparently a former Minnesota Vikings cheerleader, Katie Kiefer. Welcome.
Wow.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, sure. Go Vikings. It's time for the Daily Download. Well, even if the president refuses to call ISIS Islamic extremists, ISIS is still trying to prove they are. Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, reporting today, Islamist militants have abducted at least 90 Christian men, women, and children from a number of villages in northeastern Syria. To get a little bit more detail on this breaking story, we are joined by phone by former CIA analyst, senior fellow at the Center of Security Policy, Fred Fleitz. Fred, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Fleitz, I'm sorry, Fred. How are you?
Joe, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. So what do we know so far about this story? It's very disturbing, Fred.
It is very disturbing, and we're hearing reports from the media that 70 to 100 Syrian Christians may have been kidnapped. I've seen other reports. It could be a couple of hundred. It's possible that ISIS plans to try to trade these hostages for ISIS fighters who have been captured by the Iraqi Kurds. But we know from experience that ISIS has a habit of making offers like this, even though it has already killed the hostages. This is both an effort by ISIS to extend its campaign of terror to frighten the West and recruit followers. I also think it's an attempt to intimidate the Iraqi and Kurdish armies in the run-up to a possible military campaign to retake the town of Mosul.
At this point, would you call this a genocide? I mean, you keep hearing about I know that a lot of Christians are escaping. I know that certainly a lot have left Iraq, particularly since 2003. But still, it seems like every day we're hearing about Christians being beheaded, children being enslaved, and Christians just seem to have nowhere to go in that area. I mean, at what point do we start calling this a genocide?
I think we have to start calling it genocide, Joe. You're exactly right. It's an atrocity. It is genocide. And, I mean, ISIS right now is the face of evil in the modern world, and I think the media should be saying that clearly.
I agree with that. Airstrikes, we keep hearing about them, not only from, obviously, the United States, but Egyptians and Jordanians have joined in as well. Are any of these doing anything to slow down ISIS?
Well, the challenge with the fight against ISIS is that we have our hands tied behind our back. Obviously, the United States is not going to send troops in to fight in Syria and Iraq. President Obama wouldn't agree to do that, and the American people don't want that. So we have a very weak airstrike campaign. I think if we increase the number of airstrikes, we can make a difference in the fight against ISIS. We should be arming the Iraqi Kurds. We should be giving more support to Arab states who want to attack ISIS. We didn't even give intelligence support to the Libyans and the Egyptians when they struck ISIS targets recently. We could be arming friendly Sunni militias to take on ISIS. There's a lot we could be doing to discredit and weaken ISIS, and we're not doing it because the president does not have a serious strategy to take on ISIS.
Fred, do you agree with ground troops being sent in at this point? It seems like more polls, at least from the American people, are pointing in that direction.
I think ground troops could take out ISIS, but it's not politically possible. And even if there was support in Congress, President Obama is not going to do that. And my view is we have to focus on the possible. And the possible right now is that I think we can get ISIS out of Iraq by strengthening the Kurds and strengthening Sunnis and working with the Iraqi government. Weaken ISIS as much as we can in Syria. And down the road, we're going to have to find a way on what to do about ISIS in Syria.
Ultimately, more about our partners there than perhaps about ourselves. Fred Fleitz, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Okay, well, it seems like ISIS will do whatever they can to grab big headlines. Rick, not only does it seem like ISIS is winning the ground war, but the PR war as well.
Yeah, you know, what was interesting, I think you're finding that more and more all sides to the debate are starting to come together on some of these issues, arming the Kurds.
Are we doing that already?
We're not doing it enough, and I feel that way, and I think almost everybody that I've spoken to or know feels that way, that we have to get with that. I'm curious, you know, increasingly, that we talked about this a bit last night, there are accounts that we're having a bit more success in Iraq, and that we may have stopped them, and the die appears to be cast, and it looks good for our team. What nobody seems to be able to respond to, though, is what will happen in Syria, because there's so little that we can do.
Right, and then the alternative is that the powers that be in Damascus end up taking over, and that was supposed to be the worst enemy in the world, in other hands, in the first place, by using chemical weapons.
I mean, it's such a moving target. You know, Ash Carter had this big meeting yesterday, and he came away saying that, well, I like the strategy, it's the execution that we have to work on, but then you hear from Fred, who says we don't really have a strategy, and so you worry about what's the message here and what's actually going on. I do have to say, what came out of that meeting was a real respect for Ash Carter from the people who attended that meeting. They felt as though the fact that he said no PowerPoints, I want real lively debate, I think that's a good sign for the future of this part of the administration.
Certainly has the right name for a defense secretary, Ash Carter, right?
Very
Somebody
macho.
You don't screw with. Katie, welcome to the panel, first
you.
of all. Your thoughts on what's happened at this point with ISIS? They basically came on the radar in August. I mean, they were there before that, but the beheading of Jim Foley clearly brought them into our national spotlight. And it just seems like every day we're hearing about another atrocity, another savage act.
What's of interest to me as a millennial is that there's hundreds of Christian young men who have never fought in a war before, but they're fighting this battle, and yet we may have actually armed those Syrian rebels. In the summer of 2012, Hillary Clinton had a secret gun running program or a plan for that.
It's called Benghazi.
Right. Well, they've traced those arms to Benghazi and now also to these militants. So we do need to, before we arm anyone, look into who we're actually arming and make sure we support those Christians.
That's an excellent point. I just want to throw this thought real quick. Many liberals are towing the president's line on not associating their religion with their acts. Bill Maher, of all people, has been a very vocal exception. Let's roll that clip.
This idea that we cannot even call it Islamic terrorism seems Orwellian to me. It seems like we're paying a very high price for this, which is we can't discuss it even rationally. Can't we at least say that there are a number of factors that are involved, and the religion is certainly one of them?
Absolutely. Bill Maher's been very vocal on this, and he's been very consistent as well. So coming up next, more Daily Max. Thanks for joining us here on Newsmax TV.